Hello. Um, Today I'm going to be doing a very experimental episode where I don't use a lot of notes. The notes I have right now, they're on paper. And so, yeah, I'm going to explain in the episode why I'm doing this. And all you're going to see is a blank Photoshop page. So don't be alarmed. Okay, now I have to set up the recording. Okay. Building an indie business in the center of venture capital. I'm Alex Edmonds, and this is the Building an Indie Business podcast. Okay, so this episode is very experimental. I'm going to be walking you through my workflow for the podcast, what I do for the podcast and the services I use, and the outside services I use that are related to the podcast but don't necessarily need to be used for the podcast. Why this episode is very experimental is because I'm doing the episode without a lot of notes. And this is because I got a comment on the Product Hunt launch that I don't really like. I was told I have no energy for the podcast. So I'm going to see if having a minimal amount of notes will help me put more energy into the podcast. And if you're asking, Alex, why does the Product Hunt comment bother you? That was weeks ago. I'm recording this episode during the coronavirus lockdown in the Bay Area, and the Product Hunt launch was only a couple days ago. And it's not so much the comment that bothered me, it's the fact that he was right. So hopefully having no notes will, or a minimal amount of notes will help me add a lot of energy to the podcast. Okay, so let's get started. Hello to all my listeners in France. Okay. So the first product I use for the podcast is I use Simplenote. And what I use Simplenote for is I take notes for the podcast. So I have the subject line as a bullet point, and then my bullets are things I'm going to mention. So like how to market your podcast, use email, MailChimp, use your RSS feed. Like that's how I have my bullet points. Okay. The next service I use for the podcast is I use Audacity. And Audacity is for recording the podcast. And if you use a Mac, you can use GarageBand, but I use Audacity. You can use it for Macs. It's open source. It's great. It's really simple to use. I actually have a tutorial on how to use Audacity for a basic podcast. The next service I use is immediately after I record the podcast, I upload it to headliner.app. And what Headliner does is it allows you to turn your audio file into a video file so you can use it for YouTube. Okay, next thing. I record the podcast with a Fifine mic. I think that's how you pronounce it. Fifine. And then I use a mic stand. You can use any generic mic stand. That's what I did. For a live stream of the podcast, I use OBS Streamlabs. I used to use OBS, but it stopped letting me record, and I just downloaded Streamlabs, and it's worked perfectly. Okay. I use Restream.io to be able to stream the podcast on multiple platforms to stream it on YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch all at the same time. You need to use a different service to be able to do that. Alright, I use YouTube for the transcripts. I don't know where to put the transcripts though, but if someone emails me asking for a transcript, I'll give it to them. Alright, Overcast. I use Overcast to listen to the podcast. Overcast is available on the web and for iOS only. Another thing I use Overcast for, which I hardly do this, but I will create short videos of like points that I'm making and post that on YouTube Twitter. And Twitter only allows you to have a video that's 2 minutes long. Okay. I use Transistor for hosting the podcast, and that's what hosting is for a podcast. Is you upload the thing, your audio file, sorry about that, your audio file to Transistor, and it distributes your audio file to your RSS feed, and your RSS feed is what you send to Spotify, Apple, Google, so that people can listen to your podcast. Okay. I promote the episode on Twitter, on dev.to, and on Reddit. And basically I just post the episode, and then I have the show notes. Okay, so for the title, I do the episode title plus building an indie business podcast. And then in the body of whatever I'm posting to, I do the show notes and a link to the podcast. No, not the show notes, not all the show notes. The episode description. Okay. The final thing, so outside services that I do, I use Typeform for the survey. The problem with Typeform is that it only allows you 10 questions. And that's kind of annoying, because if you want to do other questions, you can't really do them. The types of questions that I ask, I will go over in another episode. So 10 questions. If you want to do more, I might use Google Form for the next survey that I do, but I don't know yet. I'm not there yet. So for the Product Hunt launch, what I had to do was I had to create a landing page for the podcast. And how you can do that is I bought a domain on Porkbun. It was like $3 for my .com one. I usually buy .xyz, but this one was really cheap. It was like $3 for a year. They're usually like $8 because I don't know how long I'm going to use this domain for, or like what else am I going to use the landing page for. If you're not as technical as me, which I'm not that technical, but outside of like the indie maker scene, I kind of am. In the podcasting industry, I am. Anyways, you can use WordPress or Squarespace to create your website and then buy the domain from them. For the emails, which I already have an episode where I've made the notes for, so I'll go over emails in another episode. I use MailChimp to allow to host all of the email addresses that I get that want me to send out new episodes to them. Okay. And to collect donations, which I haven't actually gotten any donations, I use Buy Me a Coffee. And the reason why I do this is because Fajar told me to, 1, and 2, unlike Patreon, on Buy Me a Coffee, you can do one-time donations, which is a little easier, and I think it encourages more donations. So, yeah, that's all I have. I didn't put a lot of energy into this one. God damn it. Yeah, I think I'm gonna redo this one. Okay. Let me see. Is there anyone in the chat? God damn it. I don't know how to put energy into this. Honestly, don't. It's hard to. It's very hard to. I don't know. No listeners. No viewers. Right. I don't know how to put energy into this. Dude. I don't know. Alright, hold on.